There's two ways to negotiate and buy in a hot market. Now, the first is to build relationships with those 2 or 3 top agents in the one suburb you're focusing on and to call them every single week. Trust me, they'll appreciate it, but
eventually,
if you do it enough, they'll probably just find you something off market to get you away from them.
It's happened to us numerous times. Like every single property that I've bought, bang, on the phone to every single agent in the area, trying to build that rapport. And then eventually I've ended up with this epic off-market opportunity, which has enabled me to get in without everybody looking at the market. Over the last few weeks, we've got some absolutely amazing updates from some of Australia's best property analysts. Now, HTW's come out saying that basically every single market in Australia is in the rising stage of the property cycle. CBA have come out and said that they're expecting 9.5% increases in capital growth this year, which is insane.
Happy days.
And CoreLogic's most recent update said throughout February, it was the fastest rising market in over 17 years in Australia. So what we're trying to get at here is it's a hot market. So in today's video, we're going to tell you some tips and tricks on how to negotiate in a hot market. So first things first, what is the difference between a hot market and a cold market?
Cool. So there's 2 different ways I think about this. And one is how people like you and I feel. And the feeling at the moment for a lot of people is we're going to miss out. There's a lot of FOMO going on in a lot of parts of Australia, which is causing people to pay silly amounts for some properties, as well as great amounts for other properties that are coming off a low base.
Even I'm sort of feeling it because I'm just refinancing at the moment, about to organise pre-approval, and I'm like, come on, Paul, let's go. Like, I want to buy this property already. I want to buy it already. But you know I just got to take a breath and just chill out and go, I know the opportunity is going to come up when the time is right.
It's funny you say that, man, because I said to you, if I try and buy another property this year, like physically stop me. And then yesterday at work, I put myself back on the board. I wanted to buy a house in southeast Brisbane and build a granny flat on it. And I went home and told my wife that we're back on the board. And she's like, rub us off the effing board tomorrow. She was just like, no more projects. And I'm feeling it too. So that is the feeling side of things. But what that physically looks like is high auction clearance rates, 70, 80, 85%. High DSR scores. So a DSR score is the demand to supply ratio score. And anything between 70 and 100 is a very hot market. Another indicator that we look at is days on market, vacancy rates, as well as the average vendor discount. So do you want to sort of talk those through?
Yeah, for sure. So days on market is essentially how long it takes for a property to settle. So in Queensland, more often than not, we've got sort of 30 to 40 days of settlement. So if you're looking at an average days on market and it's sitting around 38 to sort of 42, it is super, super hot, because that means that properties are selling within 1 to 4 days of hitting the market.
And we're finding that all across the board. And we're talking to clients all over Australia and all over the world. And it's not just Australia that's feeling this way at the moment. Parts of Canada, parts of America, parts of Europe, parts of Asia feel very much like this at the moment too. So it's kind of that time in the cycle for this sort of thing to happen, which is, hey, we've just gone through a pretty heavy time. Things have recovered a little bit better. Most people's financial position has actually improved, and people start strategically thinking about their future again.
And what's also happening right now, which CoreLogic broke down in a recent article, is we're currently at about 26 below the average compared to a year ago in terms of listings. So what we're seeing right now is FOMO from a lot of people and a lot of demand, but those supply levels are just a little bit lower, which is putting that increased pressure on the market as well.
Yeah, like I love that RP data update this week, which talked to exactly that. So the number of new loans being written is massive. It was first home buyers are up 95% from this time last year with all these grants. A good friend of mine in Sydney, who's a solicitor, just jumped into the market because he could put down a 5% government-backed deposit, which is insane. Like, if he's jumping in, he's probably the most conservative dude I know. I love you, mate, but you are conservative mofo. And so, you know, it's really cool to see that. But now the investors are coming back in,
Yeah.
and then the upgraders are back in the market as well.
Now, what I hope we see over the next few months is a bit more confidence from the seller's side, and maybe we'll see a little bit of a pickup in listing activity, but only time's going to tell with that one.
You know, one of the leading indicators there that I was looking at yesterday is when agents go to try and sell a property, they actually do a sales appraisal, and the number of appraisals has gone up by over 25% since this time last year, which is an early indicator that a lot more supply is coming. And that makes sense. Like, there's people who have been sitting on good gains in Sydney and Melbourne or Brisbane or Perth for a long time. And now that the market's improved, they'll start to realize, or they will, you know, like my wife and I just did, change properties from one to another, same as you guys in the last year.
Yeah, exactly. So what is your negotiation strategy for a hot market?
Sure. So in a hot market, we don't have time and we don't have the luxury of buying below market value for every single property. So my strategy is super, super simple. It all starts with knowing what I want. So the very first thing I do is I create a plan for the current market to go, I'm looking in Sydney or Perth or Brisbane. For me at the moment, I'm looking in Brisbane, so I'll just use my own example. And then I go, well, what part of the city can I achieve my goal? So my goal is capital growth and a property with great cash flow as well. And so I go, I would like a property in the southeastern side. Now, the reason for that is the suburbs down there are legitimately cheaper to buy than they were 10 years ago. So it ticks that box in terms of buying well. And I can also do a granny flat down there. So I'm excited about that, and I'm moving into that area for that reason. And then what I do is I look at a bunch of the different suburbs down there and I go, I want this one or this two suburbs. And then we get into the nuts and bolts. Now, the first thing we do to negotiate is understand the market and the comparable properties. So how do we sort of do that?
So that's kind of jumping onto realestate.com. For us, we use RP data because it gives you a little bit more accurate information, but you got to pay for RP data. So you can just get that information from realestate.com, but you essentially will jump onto the sold section of realestate.com and kind of create some filters to make sure that it's as close to what you're thinking about buying. So obviously, you're going to have a budget, which you should talk with your mortgage broker about your serviceability and what type of property you can purchase, how much you can service. And once you understand how much you can buy, then that's really going to narrow it down to the types of areas that you can look at. And then you want to go out there and look at that sold section to get a really good indication of where market value lies at that point in time. Then you've also got to factor in that time that it's taken from the settlement of those sales properties to what the market is doing right now as well. So it can be really tricky, but at the same time, the more research that you do on that sold section, the better position you're going to put yourself in to know where that market value truly is.
Fully. So let's say that I have had a look on the sold section of realestate.com or RP data if you want to pay for it. I've looked at all the properties that have sold on 600 blocks with 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, as well as 2 cars. Then from there I go, well, the average market value has been around about 400 grand. And then from there, I know that the market's sort of risen by about 20K since then because it is legitimately hot right now in some of these areas. And so then I start my search. I jump on OpenAgent or ratemyagent.com.au and I just put my suburb in, for example, Crestmead in southeast Brisbane. And then I find out who's who in the zoo. So that site will tell me who the big dogs are, who the agents selling all the properties are. And the reason I do this is because there's 2 ways to negotiate and buy in a hot market. Now, the first is to build relationships with those 2 or 3 top agents in the one suburb you're focusing on and to call them every single week. Trust me, they'll appreciate it, but
eventually,
if you do it enough, they'll probably just find you something off market to get you away from them.
It's happened to us numerous times. Like every single property that I've bought, bang, on the phone to every single agent in the area, trying to build that rapport, and then eventually I've ended up with this epic off-market opportunity, which has enabled me to get in without everybody looking at the market.
You know, the beautiful thing about off-market is you may get a little bit cheaper and you're the only person negotiating, so it gives you time to sort of go back and forth over a few days or a week instead of in a really hot market having to jump on that offer in the first day.
But what we're finding right now in a hot market as well is agents are very reluctant to take offers to a seller pre-market because it's so hot and because that agent has signed an agreement where they're trying to get the seller the best possible result. it's obviously in their best interest to go to the market at the moment, get more people looking at the property, get more offers onto the property, which, you know, that's a good thing that the agents are doing for the sellers. It can be tough for a buyer.
Now, in a hot market, you're normally getting somewhere between 40 and 100 people rocking up to the first open home. And so what we do is we book an inspection during the week where it's just us and the agent. Now, the reason you book the inspection is because you want to look at the property perfectly without all of the busyness, but you also want to start to build that relationship. Now, the way that you do that is tell the agent your story. And for me, it would be, you know, I'm Ben, I've got 3 young kids, I'm in a pre-approved position, I've been working with Aaron from Mortgage Choice to do that. This is exactly the sort of property that I'm looking for. I like this, I like that, I like that. And then I go into the soft part of negotiating, which is trying to find out information before I place an offer. So what I do is I ask, what is your plan for selling the property from today? And that's a really important question. Another question that I ask is, what comparable sale are you basing this property on? So that I can get a bit of a gauge of what the agent has told the seller. And then I ask, well, what feedback have you been getting from other people that have been calling you up? Now, asking those 3 questions tells me the agent's plan. 90% of the time they won't have a plan, which is why I asked the question. And then from there, it also gives me 2 different questions to ask about price, because I've already done my market analysis through RP data or realestate.com. Then I've asked those 2 questions. I've got a really good sense of what will buy it. And immediately I can go, cool, this sort of fits, or hey, these guys are absolutely dreaming. Let it go through to the keeper and maybe jump on the next one.
Yeah, so obviously a lot to kind of unpack there, but you know, this is going to be one of the biggest purchases of most people's lives. So, you know, spending this time figuring these things out is really, really important. Now, we've read some really interesting books like The Power of Negotiation by Roger Dawson, which is just an absolutely amazing book, which kind of just gives you some little things that you can use to your advantage, because you got to remember, these sales agents are professional salespeople. So, you know, they know what they need to do to get you up, because they're playing the game as well. Now, because we've got the experience from buying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property, it's a fun game for us. But if you're going in there as a novice, as a newbie, maybe you've bought 1 or 2 properties before, you've just got to make sure that you're asking these right questions, that you're getting the right information so that you're going forward with the right strategy. Because if you don't know what you're doing, these guys are going to take you for a ride.
So once I've collected that information online plus from the agent, and then I've got the agent's plan, which is normally, as Simon said, I'm going through to the first week's open home. I'm going to collect all of the offers and present them on Saturday afternoon or Tuesday. That's generally what they say. Then it's like, cool. And so if they are going to present all of the offers on Saturday afternoon, what I do is I think about the offer I'd like to place and I present my best terms. Now, that varies state to state in Australia. But for Queensland, that might be like a 30 or 35 day settlement. It might be obviously a finance clause in there, which you talk to your solicitor about. We like to put a due diligence clause in our contracts with the solicitor, plus a building and pest clause as well. We also normally like to put a flood check in there just to make sure every single different part of the process is covered. Now, what we'll do then is hold that offer, because what I've learned in a hot market is if I've gone through the property on a Wednesday and given the agent my best and final on a Thursday, knowing that they're going to only take offers on Saturday, what they're doing is, hey, I've got an offer at 400K to every single person coming in, and they're using that offer in a hot market to drive the market up.
Yep.
So what we've decided to do or started to do is, rather than, we know on a Wednesday or a Thursday what we're going to do, and we put the contract in place with the solicitor, but then we wait till the afternoon on Saturday, give the agent a quick call and say, thanks so much for this week, the offer's coming through now. Send it through via email after the solicitor's checked it out, and that puts our best foot forward without the agent being able to sort of wave it in front of everyone else's faces and use it to drive things up.
Yeah, it's really, really important, because there's some sketchy things that can go on in a really hot market, and you know, it is what it is. You just got to kind of maneuver through it and make sure that you're doing the right things. And you know, these practices obviously are going to change throughout different markets, but when it's hot, you've really got to be proactive, and you've really got to, you know, keep your chips as close to your heart as you possibly can.
Now, what I did is, in the last month of February, Simon and I submitted 22 offers for 22 different properties for clients that we wanted to buy, and we were successful getting 12. Now, we're professional negotiators that have bought over $250 million worth of property, and I'm still only buying one out of every two at the moment. So what that means is you've just got to recognize that in these hot markets, you're going to lose a lot of great properties before you find the right one. A lot of properties are going to sell for more than you want to pay, or there'll be somebody emotionally caught up. So just be aware that there's always another fish in the sea. We're sort of going to talk to our mum about this tonight, just because she's looking to buy at the moment and she's getting a bit stressed out about missing out. And it's just, there will be another good one that comes up if you're patient for a month or two.
Yeah, and this is what we just had a chat about off camera as well, because as I was saying, I'm just about ready to get back into the market. Similar sort of strategy that Ben was talking about, looking in that South Brisbane area where we see lots of long-term capital growth potential, and also that ability to manufacture some cash flow through a granny flat. And I'm seeing these great properties come onto the market and selling at great prices. And yes, there's pressure on the market right now, but I think property is a marathon, not a sprint. Nothing's going to change overnight. It is so important to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row, that you've got your pre-approval sorted, that you've got your strategy in place, that you know exactly what you're going to go out there and buy, and eventually it's going to come up. When you've got a 15 to 20 year plan, these short-term fluctuations don't necessarily affect you too much. And that's what we said, we are so patient when it comes to our properties, because we know this. Yeah, we still feel that FOMO, but we don't attach to the FOMO and we don't let it control our decision-making.
Now, when we've placed the offer, like I said, it's extremely important to have a good solicitor. And in hot markets, that's sometimes the time where people forget to do the due diligence after they've bought. So we always get a building and pest inspection, a town planning check, a solicitor to review the property, a property manager to review the property. And if we're thinking of building or doing a granny flat or something like that, we get a builder down there to check it out too. Now, we're super OCD on those details because I've personally missed things before and just completely effed it up. But, it's an important thing in a hot market. Sometimes good agents will try and pressure you to just get rid of your building and pest clause. Hey, just reduce your finance clause. And then if you need an extension, sometimes they'll put pressure on you to say, well, we've got all these backup offers, which they may or may not have. And if you extend, we're going to crash the contract. Now, that's just their fear kicking in of losing the deal. You need to safely protect yourself. So work with a good solicitor that can help you navigate all the way through that stuff in a hot market as well as a cold one.
And just know there's going to be another fish in the sea if you do miss out. It's not going to be the end of the world. So do you want to touch on maybe auctions really quickly as well? Because you've been through a few of them recently.
Yeah, so in the last couple of months, I think we've done 4. One for myself, which ended well. Yeah. And 3 for clients. So 2 of the
Which also ended well.
Yeah, 2 of the 3 ended well. One of them sold for literally 300 grand more than we're expecting. So,
Which I was absolutely stoked about because it was directly opposite my house.
Yeah, for sure. So, in an auction, very, very, very different approach. Effectively, what I do in the 2 weeks leading up personally is all of that due diligence, because you've got to remember that an auction is almost an unconditional contract. In fact, it is in many states in Australia. So that means I get my building and pest done, I get my town planning check, I get my property management check, my building check if that's what I'm doing, flood checks, solicitors checks, all of the searches for titles and everything else they recommend. There's normally about $600 worth of stuff they recommend for me to do.
Which can be tough to stomach, paying for all of that before you even go for the property, not even knowing whether or not you're going to be into it. But, due diligence is so important. So, once again, before you even get to that point, you need to make sure that you've got the right plan, that this is the right one for you, because you're going to have to pay your solicitor, you're going to have to pay your building and pest inspector, you're going to have to pay your town planner to get all of these checks done before you've even had a chance to bid.
Another really important thing is getting the pre-approval in place and written confirmation from your bank or your broker that you can do it. So I do all of that leading up, and all of that uncovers the same thing it does when buying a normal home out of auction, and that is, if there's any red flags, I could just walk away. I see it as a learning curve and a a bullet that I've dodged, a jollet that I've budged. And then I just go into the auction confident. Now, I'm obviously talking to the agent when I'm going for myself or a client multiple times in the weeks leading up, exactly the same questions. What's your plan for the auction? What comparable properties are you basing this off? What's the feedback been from the market? Now, sometimes you pay market value at an auction, sometimes you pay more, sometimes you actually grab it for less, and that was what happened last weekend. So
you never know what's going to happen on the day of an auction. So, they can be good and bad from both perspectives, but, our mum did a really good job a few years ago up on the Sunshine Coast at auction. You obviously got a really great result at an auction. We've got some for awesome clients as well. But then sometimes you get there and there's like 50 people showing up to the auction, and then, there's the price just goes eons above where you ever expected to go. And then, you just got to understand that don't attach to it. Unfortunately, it wasn't the right one for you. Let's move on to the next one.
You've done your research before the auction on realestate.com or RP data, and you know exactly what you should be paying for it. So when it comes to the auction day, of course you're going to be nervous and freaking out.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Even if you're not emotionally tied to the property, which we try not to be, it's still just, that's why they take people to auctions, because it creates competition and it gets people in a fear response and an excited response. And because of that, people sometimes do silly things.
Yeah.
Now, when I get to the auction, the biggest thing that I've learned is that, at least in Queensland, and every state in Australia is different, I go straight up to the auctioneer and the leading agent on the property selling it, and I go, what is the plan for today? And I'm asking for verbal confirmation on one thing, which is, are you going to tell us today, before you sell the property, that the property is on the market? Now, that is super, super, super important. The reason it's important is because they will constantly bait you into bidding up. 1, 2, next bid, you know what I mean? And what I've found, at least in Queensland, is that they cannot legally sell the property without going and talking to the vendor and actually coming out and telling everyone that the place is on the market. So that's really, really powerful.
So once they've said it's on the market, basically what they're saying is the price at the auction is now at a level where the sellers are happy to accept an offer.
Exactly. We're going to sell the property today. It is on the market.
Yeah.
And so what I do is one of two things. If there's a heap of people at the auction, I will start the auction with a ridiculously low bid.
Yeah.
So the other day I was at an auction in a beautiful beachside suburb called Scarborough in Brizzy, and the property wasn't everyone's cup of tea, as we say. It was, sort of needed a bit of renovation and a bit of fixing up, which I knew would put a lot of people off the property, but we'd done the building and pest and we were satisfied. We knew what we needed to do. Now, there was only 3 or 4 groups registered, but there was a bunch of people there, like 20 or 30 groups. And so I thought the property was worth 600K. I actually started at the bid at $390,000. And I just saw the auctioneer go, oh my God. Like, you know what I mean? It's the worst thing that can happen, because it takes the momentum straight out of the auction. Now, I only do that when it's packed. If it's a quiet auction, I completely sit back and watch, and I let the few people that are there bid themselves out, and I find out who's emotionally attached and who's like the big dogs at the auction.
Just seeing who's who in the zoo again.
Trying to get a sense. Now, if it's that hotter auction with a lot of people there, we start low. If it's a really hot market, it's just going to go nuts anyway. Yeah. But sometimes if it's, a hot market, but people are thrown off by that, we ended up getting that property for, I think, $525K, and it was at least worth $600K on the day. Like, it was just insane. So that strategy worked. What we did is we started the auction. We didn't do a single thing until the agent came back out and said it's on the market. And then we just smashed the last couple of people that were bidding against us. And because I knew exactly where they were at, their highest bid, I could come in a little bit above that and take the property that day. Now, when it's a quieter auction like the one that I bought for myself at home recently, I played the complete opposite game. I let them run the entire auction. The auctioneer went and said, I'm going to go talk to the owner. They came back out and they said, we still haven't hit the reserve. The property is not on the auction. And then I paused the auction. I got the top agent plus the auctioneer to come over, and I said, do they want to sell today? What will they sell it for? And they're like, I can't tell you that. And I said, I'm not going to bid again until you tell me that number. And then what I also got them to do was go around and verbally find out from the other people. Now, they shouldn't have done this, but they wanted to sell on the day. They went around to everybody else and they told me exactly what those people could pay at the auction that day. I knew these people could pay a lot more and were prepared to after the auction, but I knew the seller was emotionally invested in selling it. So what I did is I found out where they would sell it for. I found out where everyone else bidding against me was at. And then I just went $5,000 above it just before they were about to pass it in and take it back to the normal process. Now, it absolutely rattled the agent as well as everyone that was at the auction, because I was literally there like in a shirt, no shoes. I didn't look like a serious bidder. And because of the way that I played it, I was able to grab this place for, I reckon, 200 grand below what it was worth.
There you go. So, experience definitely does help when you're going to an auction. Emotions are going to be super heightened when you are showing up to an auction as well. So just be aware of that. 1000%, you've always got to go doing your research. Yep. Always go do that sales history. Make sure that if you're going to an auction, you get the agent to send you through a CMA, which is a comparative market analysis, where they'll send you through a bunch of properties that have sold recently that they're comparing the property that they're selling to, so that you know where you should be moving up to. And then if it gets too emotional and people start paying crazy overs, then just let it go. Don't feed into that. Don't become one of those emotional people and then go paying way over market value, because especially when you're investing, there's always going to be another really high quality opportunity out there.
What I love, man, is something you said, and that is it's a long-term game.
Yeah.
Regardless of how hot a market feels in 1 year, if you're holding for 15 to 30 years like we plan on doing with the small number of properties we're buying, then it's just not a big deal. Like, it doesn't really matter if you buy this month or in 3 months' time, as long as you buy the right property. Now, what happens in these hot markets is people get fatigued, people get sick of losing properties, people get lazy on due diligence, and they make mistakes. So slow down during times like this. Know that there's always another neighboring suburb that represents great value, and just be aware that you might have to pay a little bit more in this market than you would have a year ago or 6 months ago or 3 months ago. But depending on which market you're at, like if that's Darwin, Perth or Brisbane, they're all coming off the bottom of like a 10-year low. And so they still medium to long term represent insane value, and you haven't missed out.
That is such an important piece of information. I think like that's one really good word of advice there, is like understand the timing. Brisbane and Perth, 1 year ago, most areas are more affordable than 10 to 14 years ago, which is insane. So they're coming off such a bad run and they're only just starting to move. It's only the very beginning of the cycle. So, when it's a hot market like this, and, when it does come close to crunch time, don't be afraid that you may have to go in a little bit further above what you're seeing on the sold section, what you're seeing in your CMAs, because we know that there's got a lot of movement to come.
One last thing I'd like to add is just the market moves differently. So Simon was showing me something yesterday from RP Data, and the properties within 10 Ks of the CBDs in Australia, the properties walking distance to the beach, and the properties in the most expensive quartile, which is like the most expensive properties in Australia, are the ones that have been going crazy. So let's say here on the sunny coast, a property that was worth $1.2 million in January might now be worth 1.4 to 1.5 mil. Mm-hmm. But a property that was worth 600K in January is only worth 610 now.
Yeah.
Now, same in Brisbane. Like, there's suburbs close to the city like Wavell Heights that I've seen literally go from 800K to $1 million in 6 weeks. And then there's a suburb like Crestmead where you could buy a property for $340,000 in January. Now you can buy it for $345 today. So don't stress out. Recognize the pattern in these things and the history in these things, that the upper quartile and better areas go first. And like Sydney and Melbourne between 2012 and 2017, it took a long time for that ripple effect to get out there. So you've got so much opportunity as an investor or as an upgrader to get what you want. Just be patient.
Awesome, bro. Thank you so much for breaking down those tips and tricks for negotiating in a hot market. As always, guys, please subscribe to the channel. Share this with somebody that needs to watch it. We'd absolutely love it. Leave a comment below. Let us know what your thoughts are. And as always, when you're going out there, make sure you create your right plan and invest safely.
Oh, sweaty, so sweaty.